What's up guys, it's Survivor, welcome back. Today I'm jumping into Fallout 76 in virtual reality, running the game in high resolution and wide field of view on the Pimax 5K+. First off, you should know that this game does not officially support virtual reality yet, but luckily the game works great in VR, I have to say, with 3D depth and great image quality on all existing VR headsets by using the vorpX software. Like any other game, Fallout 76 looks even better in VR than it does on a PC monitor, and I gotta say it runs surprisingly smooth compared to the native Fallout 4 VR version. In this video I will tell you all about my first experience with Fallout 76 in VR, running it on the best and most GPU demanding VR headset available on the market, the Pimax 5K+. Throughout this video you will be able to see my real-life frame rates and frame times, and I will tell you all about the issues and problems you can expect running Fallout 76 in VR with vorpX. I will of course shortly guide you on how to get it running in VR and what graphical settings you can tweak for optimal performance and nearly perfect frame rate. But guys, before we begin, leave a like on this video and please subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button for much more VR and Pimax related content coming up. A big thanks to all my Patreon supporters and a special thanks to my official sponsors on Patreon, Commander Darklight, Art Armin and VR Ambassador. So yes, I know, Fallout 76 is a disaster. It's apparently the biggest fail of 2018, and by looking at all the negative reviews and low user scores, it's probably quite difficult to encourage yourself to buy it, and I fully understand that. Well, let me point out that this video is not a review of Fallout 76. After playing it for just 2 or 3 hours only in VR, I cannot really give you my opinion on this game, as it wouldn't be fair or even make any sense. I am a big fan of Fallout 4 by the way, and while I never had any big expectations on the Fallout 76, which is in fact a totally different game, I still decided to buy Fallout 76 and give it a go. Anyways, this video is all about the game in VR, and what you need to understand is that this custom VR support I'm about to show you is far from perfect. First off, the VR support in Fallout 76 is currently only possible using the well-known application called vorpX, a software that makes hundreds of new and old PC games to run in VR on any existing VR headset. Unfortunately, vorpX itself is not free to download, and to be honest, it's quite an expensive software. You will need to shell out around $40 for a license, which I personally did back in 2016. And $40 may sound ridiculous for a VR mod only, but remember, this software gives you working VR support not only for Fallout 76, but also hundreds of other popular PC games, and new game support updates get added almost daily. Among loads of supported PC games, we have a whole bunch of AAA titles like the Assassin's Creed series, all the Battlefield games, BioShock, Crysis and Far Cry as an example. Well guys, don't take me wrong, I'm not trying to sell vorpX to you, but if you want to even try Fallout 76 in VR as shown in this video, unfortunately you will need to buy a vorpX license. Having that said, the VR support in Fallout 76, just as with most other games using vorpX, is far from perfect. First off, you cannot use the VR motion controllers in the traditional way of moving your hands or weapons and aiming. Well, in fact, vorpX does support Vive controllers, Oculus Touch as well as Windows mixed reality controllers, but they won't move your hands or weapons in the game in VR. And even if you can see your controllers and move them around, you can only use the buttons to interact. This is also why most people, including me, use a mouse and keyboard or gamepad, just sitting down as you usually do playing on your PC monitor. vorpX does support positional tracking in many games, including Fallout 76 actually, which gives you room scale feeling, in other words the ability to move your head around forward and backwards and to the sides and even slightly walk around in the VR space. It's not perfect, but it works indeed. You could in fact play Fallout 76 by standing up using a VR controller or a gamepad, but the lack of VR hand interaction kind of defeats the whole purpose of standing up, and personally I prefer to play vorpX supported games such as Fallout 76 just by sitting down using a keyboard and mouse, which I also do in this video. I will get back to vorpX and show you how to set it up for Fallout 76 later on in this video, but first let's talk about the performance and how the game runs and feels in VR. First, I need to point out I'm running a PC with an RTX 2080 Ti graphic card, an Intel i7 8700K processor and 32GB of DDR4 RAM memory clocked at 3800 MHz. The Intel processor is also overclocked to 5 GHz, so the frame rates you see here are based on the best GPU on the market today, which I also overclocked to above 2100 MHz in boost. But remember, playing Fallout 76 in VR with vorpX on a high resolution and wide field of view Pimax headset is much more GPU demanding than playing it on a Vive or Rift, and also significantly more demanding than using a Vive Pro or a Samsung Odyssey, for example. Not only because the higher resolution rendered, but mainly because Pimax 5K Plus and the 8K as of today does not support motion reprojection such as the Oculus asynchronous space warp, and neither the Steam VR motion smoothing. But if you have an HTC Vive, Oculus Rift or a Vive Pro or a Windows Mixed Reality headset, you can expect much better performance in VR, as you actually do not need more than 45 frames per second to make the game run fully smooth thanks to the motion reprojection kicking in. This also means that you can most likely get a fully smooth frame rate even on a GTX 1080 or even GTX 1070 using an Oculus Rift, for example, as long as you tweak some in-game settings and turn on the ASW reprojection. On the other hand, while using the Pimax, you need to reach as close to 90 frames per second as possible to get that smooth frame rate feeling. Anyway, I have to admit that as soon as I jumped into Fallout 76 in VR, I got blown away. The game really looks beautiful and definitely more immersive running it in VR than on a flat monitor. The feeling of being inside of the world of Fallout 76 is just as mind-blowing as it is in the Fallout 4 VR game, but with two exceptions. Fallout 76 looks better and runs more smooth with higher frame rates even on a Pimax headset. Using medium in-game settings overall, high textures, high in-game resolution and FXAA anti-aliasing, the game looks and runs impressively in VR, I have to say. The wide field of view on Pimax 8K and 5K Plus really adds more into the immersion in this game, as you really feel that you're inside of the world, just like with any other VR game using the Pimax headsets, of course. With FXAA anti-aliasing instead of the default TAA, the game looks very sharp at distance and also up close. Even hundreds of meters away you can distinguish small details such as enemies and objects, and there is no blur at far distance and almost no jagged edges whatsoever. The clarity achieved in Fallout 76 is not only because of using FXAA instead of TAA, but also because I'm using a very high VR rendered resolution in-game, running it on the Pimax 5K Plus, which I will talk about later in this video. On default, vorpX lowers the render resolution, of course, but there is a way to render a high resolution which makes a huge difference, and I will show you that procedure in a moment. By the way, most of the game footage you see in this video is taken from the game window view and not the actual VR view in the headset, and that is because recording the VR view with OBS Studio software is much more GPU demanding and would give us much lower frame rates in FPS VR in the right upper corner. Strangely enough, the frame rates can go lower when inside of buildings and structures in Fallout 76, as the first vault for example, but as long as you're outside, the frame rates are surprisingly stable. While recording the footage, I've seen some sudden occasional dips in the frame rate here and there that I've never seen when running the game without the recordings active. It may be an OBS Studio issue though, so have that in mind. And while the gameplay you're just watching may not look that gorgeous, I must say that in VR, the Fallout 76 really shines and looks better than you would imagine, and most importantly, look at the frame rates. Isn't that quite impressive? Of course, some of these settings needs to be turned off to make it to run smooth, such as ambient occlusion, lens flare, motion blur and depth of field for example. Also, I have lowered the shadow resolution as well as the water and lighting quality to medium, and the shadow distance is set to low. If you are a Pimax 8K or 5K Plus user, you may wonder about the settings I'm using in PiTool software and also the field of view mode. I'm using the latest PiTool version 101.90, And throughout this video I have PiTool render quality slider set to default value of 1.0 with SteamVR super sampling at 100%. For some reason I noticed that lowering the SteamVR super sampling to 80, 70 or even 50% does not gain you much performance boost but lowers the image quality significantly. So this is why I kept it on default 100%. As for the field of view, I'm not a big fan of the small field of view with Pimax, which is around 120 degrees horizontally, so I'm only using normal field of view mode in PiTool while running Fallout 76 in this video, which gives me roughly 150 degrees of field of view horizontally. Again, have in mind I'm running this on an overclocked RTX 2080 Ti GPU, so if you run this on a GTX 1070 or 1080 or a 1080 Ti, well, you may need to lower the FOV or the PiTool render quality if you cannot reach the desired frame rate of as close to 90 frames per second as possible, or 80 frames per second if you use the Pimax 8K. The image that is rendered with vorpX using the official Fallout 76 profile is covering almost the entire normal field of view with Pimax, with just a very small black bar on each side and even a thinner black bar on the top and at the bottom. I would estimate that the rendered horizontal field of view with vorpX in Fallout 76 to be around 140 degrees on the Pimax 5K Plus, and while you can make the image larger and fill it up entirely by using the vorpX image zoom option, I feel the image quality decreases a lot and it's just not worth it if you ask me. And how about 3D stereoscopic view? Well, while the three-dimensional feeling in VR using vorpX is not perfect as we're using Z-buffer 3D view in this case, I still have the awesome 3D depth throughout the whole visible VR image. vorpX currently has geometric 3D and two Z-buffer 3D modes available in Fallout 76. The Geo 3D is a much more GPU demanding mode, and using the Pimax 5K Plus or the 8K, it's simply impossible to get an acceptable frame rate having this mode active. Switching from Z-buffer 3D mode to geometry 3D on my system with an RTX 2080 Ti, the frame rate goes down instantly from around 90 frames per second to between 30 and 40. Also, many times switching to geometry 3D mode can result in a game crash, especially while recording the gameplay at the same time having the FPS VR frame rate monitor application active. And this is also why I couldn't even show you the frame rate difference example of the two 3D modes while recording this video. I'm sorry for that. So anyway, this is why I'm using Z-buffer 3D mode throughout this whole gameplay. The Z-buffer 3D mode can occasionally create some minor artifacts as the 3D stereoscopic view is somehow emulated, but most of the time it still looks great and the 3D depth is more than acceptable and quite impressive in my opinion. If you're running Fallout 76 in VR on the HTC Vive or Oculus Rift, you can most likely turn on the Geo 3D mode instead for an even more precise 3D view. And I'm sure that the lower resolution rendered with the HTC Vive and Oculus Rift can handle an acceptable frame rate with Geo 3D mode. I won't get too technical about the difference between the stereoscopic 3D modes today, and I'm sure many of you already know all about how vorpX and its 3D modes are handled, but if you are new to vorpX, I recommend you to visit their community forum for full guides and more information. So how about playability? Well, it's good, but far from perfect. The interaction with objects, aiming, melee attacks on enemies is easy handled with mouse and keyboard just like always, especially if you only use your mouse for horizontal turning and use your head to look up and down and to the sides as well. It takes some time to get used to it, of course, but I wouldn't say it's difficult. But we have a few issues here that I need to point out, which we also have a workaround for. While the in-game render image is almost entirely filling your field of view on the Pimax 5K Plus, the head-up display or the HUD is barely visible because it's located almost at the edges of the screen. Another problem is the Pip-Boy, which is supposed to be shown together with your arm a bit away from your eyes, just as it does in the native Fallout 4 VR version, and when it does so, it's easy to navigate it and easy to read everything. But for some reason the Pip-Boy sometimes renders in full screen mode suddenly, which makes it very difficult to read stuff at the sides and in the corners. I have so far not found any setting to disable Pip-Boy in full screen mode, but I assume there should be a way to do so. Also, while looking at the map in full screen, the perk charts and all the in-game menus, they're all rendered in full screen mode, making it impossible to read the text at sides and in the corners. Luckily, there is a very easy workaround for all these issues mentioned, which is available from start using the Fallout 76 vorpX official profile. If you click the middle button on your mouse, the image will instantly zoom out, giving you kind of a cinema mode of the game image, where you can easily turn your head and see and read everything on the image, even at the corners. So basically, as soon as I jump into the map by pressing escape, or going into the main menu, or watching the Pip-Boy, which shows in full screen sometimes, I click on the middle mouse button and zoom out the image for a second to be able to see everything. And if you click the middle mouse button one more time, you will instantly fall back to the full VR mode again as before. You may call it primitive, but while it feels a bit strange from start to zoom in and zoom out a lot, I would say you get used to it very fast. Also, sometimes the camera can go crazy when in third-person mode. Well, for example, when you die or when you craft weapons and such, as the camera moves rapidly when you move your mouse or your head. If you're new to VR, I think you could get a little bit dizzy by this. For me personally, it was not a big issue. Reading terminals or notes, it's mostly easy without any issues, but sometimes you may need to hit the middle mouse button again to zoom out, as mentioned before, if you get too close for some reason. There might be a few other minor issues with playability and interaction that I have forgotten to mention now, but overall I would say Fallout 76 is fully playable in VR with vorpX as of today already, and I'm sure the vorpX profile for this game will improve over time, making it even better. So now, how do we get Fallout 76 to run in VR? First off, you need to purchase and install vorpX, of course, and the Fallout 76 game as well. If you need more help with vorpX, I'm sure there are loads of tutorials on YouTube available already, as well as getting started guides in the official vorpX forums. If you're planning to run this on a Pimax 8K or 5K plus, as I'm doing in this video, make sure to have the PiTool software and Steam VR running already. Now, start up vorpX, right-click on the vorpX control icon located on the Windows taskbar and choose Configure vorpX. Now go to the General tab and make sure you have chosen Steam VR in the device selection drop-down menu, both for the Pimax, Vive and Windows Mixed Reality headsets. If you use the Oculus Rift, you can optionally pick the Oculus Rift option in the drop-down menu as well for native Oculus rendering without Steam VR. As you can see, I have left all the other options on default values and I recommend you to not change them. Underneath the General tab there is a Local Profiles tab, but we're not gonna touch that now. Go down to the cloud-based profiles instead. Here you can import the latest updated game profiles for vorpX, both unofficial and official, and make sure to log in that window first, otherwise the search bar might not even work. In the search bar, type Fallout and you will see a whole bunch of Fallout profiles for each game version. Now click on the Fallout 76 official profile, which is by the way the supported version by the latest vorpX version and also optimized for Z-Buffer 3D Vision. So click on the import profile and once the profile is imported, you're basically done. Just apply and close that window. Now start up Fallout 76 from either the Bethesda launcher or directly if you have created a shortcut to the game executable file. The first time you'll start up the game with vorpX, it will start in borderless window mode. For some reason, vorpX profile wants you to run the game in a specific resolution and in windowed mode. Using a low resolution headset such as HTC Vive or Oculus Rift, well, this might work great, but using the Pimax 5K Plus for example, the game will look very low resolution this way and quite bad to be honest. We need to increase the resolution a bit and that's not possible while being in game already. Also, for some strange reason, running Fallout 76 in windowed mode with vorpX and Pimax, the field of view or well, the rendered game image will be smaller compared to running it in full screen mode. Don't ask me why, but it just works this way at the moment. When the game runs in window mode together with the low vorpX resolution, the image inside of your Pimax looks like a letterbox or maybe 110 degrees field of view. But if you start the game in full screen mode and a higher resolution, it fills up much more of the field of view on your Pimax, almost covering the normal field of view mode of 150 degrees. So what we need to do here is to force the game to start with a higher resolution in vorpX. Let's close the game and enter the directory where the Fallout 76 config files are located. We see instantly that vorpX has made some backup files of the config files. I'm gonna simply delete those backup files before we do anything else. Moving on, the default Fallout 76.ini file does not need any changes here, as the two custom ini files are overriding the settings anyways. Open up the Fallout 76 custom.ini file instead. This is the file that vorpX has modified or created if you have never made a Fallout 76 custom ini file before. Here, the vorpX profile has changed some necessary and recommended in-game settings, such as disabling the lens flare, the depth of field, the motion blur, and other stuff. Now what I added into this file is this line, which enables FXAA anti-aliasing instead of the default TAA anti-aliasing, making the game look much better in VR and less blurry on distance. The other settings below were automatically set by the vorpX profile, and here you can change them if you need to, like decreasing the shadow map resolution to maybe 512 or even 256 for example. In my case, I just left it on 1024. You can also decrease the shadow distance and many other things just by adding new lines here if you know what you're doing. But the important things here are the full screen option and the resolution which vorpX has applied on default. First off, change the borderless to 0 and full screen to 1. This will give you a larger image and field of view as I just mentioned. Now, by changing the resolution here to either 1440p or even 4K resolution, Fallout 76 will look significantly sharper in VR. In my case, I use a full 4K resolution for the game rendering, which is 3840 x 2160. Have in mind, this might not be necessary if you're not running a high definition VR headset such as Pimax, and remember, if you have a lower end GPU than my RTX 2080 Ti or the GTX 1080 Ti, you might need to stick to 1440p as a resolution, for example, instead of the 4K to keep up the good performance. Once it's done, save and close the file, and now right click on the file again and choose properties and make the file read only. This will prevent vorpX from overriding the resolution and full screen lines back to previous values, which it tries to do every time you start up the game. Now open up the third ini file, which is called Fallout 76 prefs.ini, and change the same lines in that file for resolution and full screen mode just in case. Also save that file and make this file read only as well. Now when you start the game again, it will start up in full screen with a much sharper VR image thanks to the high resolution and bigger field of view on your Pimax thanks to the full screen mode. Once you are in the game and in VR, push the delete key on your keyboard to bring up the vorpX config menu, which is only visible in VR and not on your monitor. First, change the 3D construction option to Z Adaptive or Z Normal. Of course, you can run it with Geometry 3D mode if your PC can handle it, but most likely you will get quite bad performance, especially if you run this game on a Pimax headset with high resolution. Now let's look at all the other options I have used for this testing session. I need to add that in this example I forgot to turn off the depth of field option in the options here, and I strongly recommend you to disable that option. In the image settings on the next page, I turn off the crystal image option, as it's definitely not needed when running in a high resolution, especially with Pimax, and turning it off will also give you some more performance. You can change the aspect ratio, but the pixel 1:1 mode is preferred, so I don't recommend to change it. Here you can also zoom the image if you want to, as I mentioned earlier, but I keep it on default 1.0 as it almost covers my normal field of view on the Pimax 5K Plus, and it looks more sharp than zoomed in. Again, I think most of the other options here, I just leave them on default as I don't think they're necessary, but of course if you want to play around with the settings, you can do that on your own. The preferred resolution quality doesn't seem to do any difference going between 1440p and 1680p, but I guess that's because we manually changed the resolution already in the ini files before. The direct mode fluid sync can help you get a smoother head movement sometimes, especially when you struggle with the frame rate and see stutters. I prefer to actually leave it on just in case of. Also, in the main settings, you can change the VR mode from full VR to immersive VR screen mode, which looks like a zoomed out mode I mentioned before by pressing the middle mouse button. Running this mode still gives you 3D view and head movements. There's also a cinema mode available, which is quite cool and looks like big screen beta game mode, and even this mode in VR is better and more immersive than running Fallout 76 on a flat monitor, I would say. You get a wide field of view and the screen size gives you a very big 3D image, which actually looks even sharper now as the image is zoomed out, keeping the same rendered game resolution. Personally, I just prefer to play in full VR mode, which of course is what vorpX is made for from the start, giving you a real VR feeling with positional tracking, correct field of view and realistic head movements. You can also adjust the 3D depth and make it even more aggressive here. The default value is 1.5 and 2.0 gives you a little bit more 3D depth perception if you prefer it that way. By the way, about the positional tracking and room scale, to enable positional tracking with Fallout 76 and vorpX, you need to make direct VR scan at least once. You can find it in the menu here, and don't do it while being inside of the in-game menus. Do it only when you're outside in the game world. It takes a few seconds and enables positional tracking and gives you room scale feeling so you can lean against objects and move around in your 3D VR space. So there we go, if you just follow these steps, you will be able to play Fallout 76 in VR on practically any VR headset available. I hope this video helps you to get an idea on how Fallout 76 runs in VR for now, and also how you set it up. I'm sure there are many other tweaks and stuff you can make to further improve the performance and image quality in Fallout 76, but for now, this is all I know. If I find any more improvements, I will for sure make a follow-up video with Fallout 76 with vorpX, and hopefully one day we will see a way to run this game in native VR just like Fallout 4 VR. Who knows, there might be a way to do so already now. I mean, Fallout 76 is based on the same game engine as Fallout 4 VR, and I wouldn't get surprised if someone makes native VR possible in this game very soon, and if that happens, I will for sure let you know about it. Lastly, remember Fallout 76 is an online-based game, and so far there is no anti-cheat system added that can prevent vorpX from running or make it forbidden, but one day Bethesda could potentially add some more protection to their game, and worst case scenario, banning users who uses mods like the vorpX, for example. So use this at your own risk. As for now, there are no reported issues about bans or warnings from people using Fallout 76 with vorpX online, but if it becomes a problem in the future, I will let you know about it as soon as possible. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to my channel for more VR, Pimax and Fallout 76 related videos coming up, and hit that bell button to not miss out any of my next videos. A big thanks to all my lovely Patreon supporters, and a special thanks to my official sponsors on Patreon, Commander Darklight, Art Armin and VR Ambassador. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!